That to me adds more uniqueness to this particular firearm. But I have to put that, if you will, disclaimer on there because I can't check them all. But in my opinion, they were both fired from the same gun.
Showing State's Exhibit 16, and this is an image of a cartridge, correct?
Yes.
And that was sent to you from the Las Cruces Police Department?
Yes.
Now, as far as the evidence back here indicates one cartridge from the weapon.
Yes.
And that came from the weapons chamber, right?
According to the documentation on the bag, correct.
Showing you State's Exhibit 17. And what are we seeing there?
We're seeing a magazine and 4 cartridges.
And these cartridges came from the interior of the magazine, correct?
They were loaded in the magazine when I received them, yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19. What is that?
It is a fired bullet.
And did you receive that from the Las Cruces Police Department as well?
Yes.
Showing you State's Exhibit 20. Can you describe that for the jury, please?
It's a close-up of one of the bullets that I received.
And do you know what this material is in here?
There were some white fibers that were caught in the bullet as it mushroomed. When I talk about mushrooming, I'm talking about usually hollow point style bullets. And a hollow point style bullet is designed to increase its diameter by folding back when it strikes an object. And sometimes material will get trapped in the petals of the hollow point as it folds back.
We'll come back to State's Exhibit 20 and 19 in a moment, drawing your attention to these lines. But first I need to show you State's Exhibit 21. Can you identify that, please?
Yes, it's another fired bullet that I received.
And is that an expanded hollow point?
Yes.
What type of test do you conduct on projectiles that you receive for analysis in order to be able to determine what firearm they were fired from?
Well, I mentioned earlier that when they make a firearm, they also machine the barrel also. Usually, when they're making barrels, they put what's called rifling in a barrel. And rifling are spiral grooves they cut in the bore of the barrel to make the bullet spin. You want the bullet to spin because it'll make it more accurate, it'll fly truer and straighter. So that's the design for rifling. When they cut the grooves in there, the cut portion are called grooves. Now the raised portion between two grooves is called a land. So when I refer to lands and grooves, that's what I'm talking about. Now, different manufacturers will put however many number of lands and grooves in a particular barrel. Two manufacturers may put the same number of lands and grooves in a barrel. They may design the same direction of twist. They're either going to twist to the right or they're going to twist to the left. They can design the width of these lands and grooves also. These are what we call class characteristics. Glock in particular uses a different way of rifling barrels. They use what's called a hammer forging process. In other words, they do not cut any grooves in the barrel and leaving the lands either. What they do is they'll take a tube that's been drilled, a piece of metal that's been drilled, a tube. They'll place what's called a mandrel that has the configuration of the rifling on there. It's a very hard piece of metal. They'll insert that into the barrel, and then they'll hammer the outside of the barrel and basically squeeze the barrel around that mandrel. Once that's done, they'll remove the mandrel out. So they pretty much form the barrel to the lands and grooves on the barrel. Now, this type of processing or rifling is called polygonal style. So in other words, there's no cut lands and grooves, but there are raised areas in the barrel of a Glock pistol that do twist to the right And there's 6 of these raised areas, and the depressions are called we would call those the grooves. The raised would be the lands. But when you see them side by side to a cut rifle barrel, they look totally different. With Glock firearms in particular, they're very difficult for us to identify bullets because there's no machining processes other than that drilling that takes place. That's why they're very difficult to make an association with a Glock firearm.
So to give a better illustration of what you just described, taking a look at State's Exhibit 20 and drawing the juror's attention to this shaded area here that would appear to be the dark stripes and those. Is that what you're generally speaking of?
It does show some of the rifling, but it's really difficult to see again in a photograph. I brought another demonstrative aid that I didn't show you that I have here, just a photograph showing the difference between cut rifling and polygonal rifling, if that would help.
Yes, please support Mr. Guerra could use his demonstrative.
Yes, go ahead, proceed.
It's a photograph, and you can place it on the monitor if you...
Yes, please approach. And as defense counsel, Mr. Clark, have you seen this?
I've seen it before, Your Honor, and I have no objection.
All right, thank you.
Can you describe for the jury what were I can have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead. Here, where you going first, Steve?
No, sir. We have a sticker. I'm just looking for the last exhibit numbers. Call something proper.
All right, so the last one that's on the list is 158, so let me suggest 159.
159.
And Judge, that's without objection. No objection.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
And Mr. Guerra, can you please describe for the jury what we're seeing in State's demonstrative exhibit 159?
What we're looking at are casts that I made of. This material that I made the cast out of is like a silicone-based material. It's called microsil. So on the right side of the dividing line, again, I put them both on the comparison microscope. On the right side of the dividing line, you can see a barrel that's cut rifle. You can see definite borders of grooves and again, the raised portion of the lands on that barrel. On the left side is a cast of a Glock barrel. And you can see that they're more smooth. They're not, the shoulders, if you will, of the lands and grooves are not very pronounced. So they're not very defined, but they're still there.
Did you do a comparison microscope test of identification? Can you describe to the jury what we're seeing?
What we're seeing is one of the evidence bullet, my item 56-1, compared to one of my test fire bullets, test TB1, from the pistol, the Glock pistol. Again, you really can't see any cut rifle like I showed in my demonstration. You get usually on Glock bullets these rub areas that the raised portions of the barrel come in contact with. And that's how we can kind of try to get them lined up. But again, I could not, this is what it looked like.
And were you able to come to a conclusion with regard to the test fire projectile and the projectile that was submitted for examination as to whether or not it was fired from State's Exhibit 13?
They shared those class characteristics. In other words, they were both polygonally rifled. They had 6 lands and grooves. But I was unable to say that, in fact, that those bullets were fired by that gun. So my results was I could neither identify or eliminate them as having been fired by the pistol.
Mary, press the witness to return the demonstrative.
Yes, thank you.
And Mr. Guerra, I'm showing you now the marked State's Exhibit 24 for identification. Can you tell us what we're seeing here?
What I noticed when I was doing my examination of the bullets and my test-fired bullets, I noticed on the center of these fired bullets was a shape in the center. I can't think what it would be called. Right there in the center. These cartridges that I was using for test firing are called Spear brand gold dot ammunition. One of their trademarks that they do on this particular line of ammunition is after it mushrooms, it leaves a small copper dot in the middle of the mushroom bullet, on the head of the bullet. So that's what you're seeing here. I noticed that on my test-fired bullets, the dot was different than the evidence bullets. So I was just trying to track down that difference and seeing what if that meant anything in particular.
And is there any value from State's Exhibit 24, the imagery there, that would assist in your determination as to whether or not the bullet in question was fired from State's Exhibit 13?
Not at all.
And just returning your attention to State's Exhibit 17, can you describe what those 4 cartridges are? Those 4 cartridges the Spear Gold Dot brand cartridge before being fired?
Yes.
They're both hollow. They're all hollow pointed in character, right?
Yes.
Did you conduct any testing on any submitted cartridges to determine whether or not an attempt to fire them had been made?
Yes, that's one of our routine examinations that we do on live ammunition that comes into the lab.
And what were the results of the test in this case?
I could not determine that there was no attempted firing of those cartridges.
As part of your testing protocol, do you attempt to determine the range at which a pistol was fired from an object?
Yes.
And what methodology do you use in order to make that determination?
Let me back up a little bit and tell you what we're going to talk about. We're talking about distance determination. And we're talking about how far away an individual or a piece of clothing was away from the muzzle of a firearm when it went off. Not only does a bullet come out of the barrel, but there are other components that also come out of the barrel too. Those are either vaporous lead that you see, when the smoke you see that goes when a firearm is fired. There are also burning gunpowder particles, unburned particles, and they also come out of the muzzle. If the target is close enough to the muzzle of the firearm, I would expect to find these particles of these materials on the actual clothing. As you increase the distance, they finally will not make it to the target. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm trying to find patterns of these gunpowder residues, or gunshot residues.
Now, the particles that are heavier, will they travel as far as the larger particles? Or?
The gunpowder particles will tend to fly further because there's more mass. And you can imagine if you take a flashlight, let's say, and you turn the flashlight on, you hold it up to your hand, and as you back away the flashlight from your hand, that circle, the light gets larger. So that it kind of works the same way. You increase the distance and that pattern gets larger until finally it just dissipates. But the heavier gunpowder particles will travel further than the vaporous lead particles. Sometimes we'll get fragments of lead, depending on the cartridge, that will also come out and strike the clothing, and we can find those too.
And what is soot?
Soot is kind of a term to describe all of these residues. They look usually black in color if the shot is close enough, and you'll get a sooty looking type color on material.
What is stippling?
Stippling refers to actual particles, gunpowder particles striking tissue or striking skin. If the particle is traveling fast enough, it may leave a contusion or a bruise on the skin, not embed in the skin, but leave a bruise on the skin. And we refer to that as stippling.
Did you receive items of clothing that you were able to conduct tests on?
Yes.
And can you describe to the jury the manner in which you the test to arrive at an approximation for a distance?
In this case, I received some articles of clothing, a t-shirt, a pair of warm-up pants, and a pair of athletic shorts. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the item out, photograph it, and we'll talk about the shirt first. Is that okay?
Yes.
We'll talk about the shirt first. I'll search for apparent bullet holes that are holes in the shirt that were caused by the passage of a bullet. In this case, I received a partial shirt. I only had the right side, the right front, the right sleeve, the right side, and the right back. The rest of the shirt was missing. So that's all I had. So I did find approximately 8 holes in the shirt that may have been created by the passage of bullets.
And after finding those holes, well, first let's go to the pants. Did you do an analysis on any other items of clothing?
I had a pair of pants, also a pair of warm-up pants. I believe there were 4 holes in the pants, but only one looked like it had been created by the passage of a bullet, and that was located in the rear, just left of the center seam of the pants. The other article of clothing I received was a pair of athletic shorts that also had a hole in the rear, just left of center. Those are the only 2 other articles I received.
And were you able to locate any gunpowder particles on either of the pants items?
After I get the clothing out, locate the holes, I'll number the holes so I can have a reference to them. Then I'll go ahead and place the items under another microscope looking for unburned gunpowder. Again, not all of the powder will combust in a cartridge. Some of it will escape out of the muzzle, and again, it may adhere to the clothing, so that's what I was looking for. So I examined all 3 articles of clothing, and I could not find any gunpowder particles.
And can you describe for the jury the types of tests that you performed on the shirt? The modified Grice test and sodium rhodizonate test.
These are 2 chemical tests that I do to locate the burned gunpowder particles. Actually, the modified or the Grice test is looking for the burned gunpowder particles. So it's a chemical test that I use. I apply chemicals to a piece of photographic paper that make it sensitive to nitrite or to burned gunpowder particles. So I'll take this piece of photographic paper, place it down. I'll take the article of clothing and place the exterior side on top of it. Then I'll get another piece of material and soak it in another chemical and lay it on top of that. And then I'll iron it. After I remove everything and look at the photographic paper, if there's any orange dots that appear on the photographic paper, that is a sign that there's a nitrite or a burned gunpowder particle. So that's what I'm looking for.
And did you find any orange dots in this?
I found only 2 nitrite particles, and I'm sorry I keep talking about nitrite particles. That's a burned gunpowder particle, is a nitrite. So I found 2 nitrites, one on the shirt that was up near one of the holes in the sleeve, and then 1 nitrite particle that was on one of the holes in the warm-up pants, but it was on the knee area, and that hole did not look like it was created by the passage of a bullet.
Now, were you able to determine the muzzle to garment distance on the shirt?
Yes.
And one question.
Can I explain a little bit?
Yes, sir, please.
So to determine the distance, after I do all my testing on the clothing, to see what kind of, if I have any gunpowder patterns on that clothing. In this case, I only had those 2 nitrite reactions. So I'll take the firearm, I'll take similar ammunition that was used in the incident, and test fire at known distances. So in this case, I started off at 3 inches, then I shot 4 shots at 3 inches, 4 shots at 6, a foot, and out to, I believe it was 6 feet that I fired test shots. In this case, I fired 2 shots in cotton material and 2 shots in a polyester material because the pants were made out of polyester. So I do those test firing, I bring those samples back, I test them the same way I tested the clothing, and then I can try to bracket my distance. In other words, when I come up with a distance, usually it's going to be something like It's greater than contact. In other words, it's greater than the muzzle being placed up against the material, and maybe less than a foot, as an example. In this case, since I only found 2 particles, I'm just going to report out the maximum distance. So in this case, the maximum distance, or the closest that the gun could be, was greater than 2 feet. In other words, it had to be 2 feet and greater to receive these shots.
One other question deals with the concept of, and you touched on it briefly, contact or blowback. What would the blowback be? Concerning the projectile or striking a body that is in very close proximity to the muzzle of the firearm.
The term blowback usually refers to when a firearm is placed up against tissue or skin, and you get material, skin or whatnot, back on the firearm, if that's what you're referring to.
Yes. And did you see any evidence of anything like that in this case?
On the firearm?
Yes.
I didn't examine it for blowback.
And your estimation is that the firearm was greater than 2 feet away from the victim whenever it was fired?
Yes.
I have a moment, John.
Yes, Mr. Vice.
Mr. Guerra, gunshot residue. Can you describe to the jury what that is, and I'll ask a follow-up question as soon as I give you the demonstration.
Again, I think gunshot residue is the components, the vaporous lead or lead particles, unburned gunpowder, partially burned gunpowder, and burned gunpowder ending up on a piece of clothing. Those are gunshot residues.
And in the past, has there been a test that was performed to determine the presence or absence of gunshot residue?
I'm sorry.
Well, let me describe it this way. As part of the scientific process, is there a gunshot residue test that is performed by your crime lab?
The test that I just described is the test that we do, the gunshot residue test, trying to determine distance. I think you're probably referring to any gunshot residue on hands, on a shooter's hands. That test is called a primer residue test.
So as far as the primer residue test is concerned, are those performed by your laboratory?
No.
And is there a particularized reason why?
The only reason I know is the reason that the Albuquerque Police Department does not do those anymore. I don't know exactly the reason why the state lab doesn't do those exams anymore. Since I've been there, we have not. I have the pistol locked open and the slide is being held back by a part on here. So you can see that there's no magazine in the firearm, and there's no cartridge in the chamber area.
Examination of Mr. Guerra.
Good morning, Mr. Guerra.
Good morning, Mr. Clark.
All right, so let me back up. When Mr. Byers was asking about your qualifications, you have worked with state crime for a very long time, right?
For almost 12 years.
And you talked about the different areas in which you've been qualified as a firearm tool marks expert, correct?
Yes.
And one of those was firearms, right?
Yes.
And then tool marks?
Yes.
Okay. And when we talk to the jury about tool marks, we're not talking about a hammer striking a nail, right?
No, we're not.
But firearms, in your line of work, in my line of work, firearms are tools, right?
Yes.
And so, for instance, a tool mark might be the mark on shell casing as it flies through the ejector, right?
If it strikes the ejector port, correct.
Or the firing pin striking the firing pin striking the cartridge, right?
Striking the primer, yes.
Right. And so when we talk about tool marks, this is what we're referring to in regards to these firearms or weapons, right?
Yeah, firearms are a tool. It's basically but it's the main tool that we examine. Tool marks is really basically the umbrella, and firearms really falls underneath that. We just do more work with firearms. That's correct.
And then one of the other areas you talked about was you're a certified expert in gunshot residue, correct?
Yes.
And that's the acronym we talk about as GSR?
Yes.
Okay. And approximately how long have you been certified by the State Crime Lab as a gunshot residue expert?
A little less than a year.
Okay. How many times have you testified in a court as a gunshot residue expert?
That I don't know a number offhand. I'd probably say, since working at the crime lab, at least 5 times.
Okay. Out of those 5 times been in state court in New Mexico?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury and tell the court what district courts in New Mexico you can qualify as a gunshot residue expert?
Usually when I get qualified, it's always just the firearm tool mark examiner, and then I've given testimony in gunshot residue. So I don't know if it's been specifically gunshot residue per se.
Can you tell the court what, like Bernalillo County, Chavez County, Las Cruces?
Bernalillo County, this district here, and then up in Taos, I don't remember where the county is there, but that district also. Yes.
Have you ever been offered as a gunshot residue expert and not been accepted as an expert by the court?
No.
Okay. Your Honor, in addition to tool marks, I would also ask the court qualifying me, and this would be allowed to speak to the jury as an expert in the area of gunshot residue.
Again, since he has already been testifying to that fact, Mr. Byers on the state has no objection. So the state will qualify or designate Mr. Guerra as an expert witness related to gunshot residue.
Thank you, sir. Now, Mr. Guerra, I'd like to have you back up and look at a couple of photographs. The state's already shown you these, and I'm going to show them to you again and ask you to identify some parts of the gun. I think it's more prudent perhaps to use the photograph of the actual weapon, since we've already established that State's 14 is an accurate description of the pistol.
Okay.
All right. You see that clearly on your screen?
Yes.
Okay, so for the record, what we're looking at is State's 14, which is an accurate, described as an accurate depiction of the firearm which was examined by your office, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm going to point to some points on this weapon. And you tell me what you would call these parts, so that there is no dispute about what part of the component of the firearm we're talking about. Okay.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Coleman, could I encourage you just to slow it down just a little bit in terms of
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Thank you. No apology necessary. Just a little bit.
What would we call this part of the weapon?
That would be the grip.
Okay. And so for purposes forward, I'll refer to it as a grip, and we all know what we're talking about, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then this portion right here, what would we call that?
The trigger guard.
Okay. And then what would we call this portion of the weapon?
The trigger.
Okay. And then this portion on top, what would you call, folks? What would you call this portion from front to back that has these serrated grooves on the back of that one there?
That would be the slide.
Okay. Now, on this weapon, can you hold the weapon up and demonstrate the slide mechanism for the jury?
Yes.
All right. So this is a semi-automatic pistol, correct?
Yes.
And semi-automatic means, please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not saying this in proper technical terms, but in a semi-automatic weapon, we have the magazine that is inserted through the grip, right? The magazine would go in right there.
Yes.
And we've already seen the magazine depicted in States 17, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And this black part right there, that would be the magazine for those of us who are not knowledgeable about semi-automatic weapons, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in this Glock firearm, the magazine holds multiple rounds, correct?
Yes,
And the capacity for this magazine, if I'm not mistaken, is 15, right?
that's correct.
Okay. And that's inserted into the handle.
Yes.
Into the grip, right? Handle is not the right word.
Yes,
Into the grip, right?
yes,
And before the weapon becomes ready to fire, you must move the slide back, return it to its original position, and the firearm is then loaded and ready to fire, right?
yes. It loads a round from the magazine into the chamber.
Okay. And the round will be the cartridge plus the projectile before fire, right?
That's correct.
Now, after the trigger is pulled on this or any other semi-automatic weapon, the trigger is pulled, fire pin hits the primer, there's an explosion within the firearm, projectile travels down the barrel, and the shell casing is then ejected or removed from the gun through the ejector, right?
Relatively speaking, that's what happens.
And that's not as scientific as maybe you would describe it for lay people. That's an accurate description, right?
Yes,
Okay. Now, on this firearm, we don't see the ejector port, do we?
that's correct. It's on the other side.
Can you hold up the fire for a moment and display to the jury or point out, and maybe so they're looking at the level of the ejector?
This large hole on the top and side of the pistol.
So when the slide comes, it goes back, the shell casing is ejected out of the ejector port, and it goes off someplace to the right in this case, right?
Right and rear.
Right and rear. So if I'm holding that pistol in a firing position or any position, I'll hold it forward to the right. After it's fired, the shell casing will go to the right or to the rear, correct?
As long as you're holding it in that position that you demonstrated.
This is a right-handed, this gun is equipped for a right-handed shooter, right?
Most firearms are equipped for right-handed shooters.
Okay. Now, a left-handed shooter, if they so desire, this can be modified so the shell casing will go out to the left and back, correct?
I don't believe so. I don't know. But I don't think so. You can do pretty much anything you want, but I don't think you can do that with this gun.
With this gun, it can't be modified for left.
I think you would have to change the slide completely so it's reverse of what it is now.
One of the reasons, what I'm getting at is one of the reasons is that the shell casing is going to fly out to the right and the back, so the shell casing is going to go fly across the vision of the person who's firing.
Exactly right.
Okay. It's a very practical reason.
Yes.
And so this gun would appear to you to have not been modified in any way.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, there is one modification to this firearm we haven't described yet, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And pointing to, looks like what I know to be a flashlight, right?
Yes.
And you know that to be, is that the proper terminology?
Just a flashlight, yes.
Flashlight. And the lug would be what holds it on, or what it's attached to?
Yes, the rail.
The rail. And this, so when the jury's looking at this, this is not an extra barrel, this is just a flashlight, right?
That's correct.
And which allows the user to have an object that illuminates his surroundings without using another hand, right?
That's correct.
So when we look at this firearm, then when we describe the grip, the trigger guard, the trigger, the slide, are there other parts of this gun that you would describe, or are those the four major areas?
Yeah, I would probably go into more detail of the other parts that would mark cartridge cases, or cartridge cases.
Okay. And of course the magazine, which is not depicted in this photograph, right?
Yes.
But which we've already depicted in States 18, we've already identified, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, before we go further, in States 18, we have a depiction of a magazine and 4 cartridge cases, right?
Cartridges.
Cartridges, I'm sorry. 4 cartridges that have been unfired.
That's correct.
And then in States 16, there's another unfired cartridge, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So just for clarification, when this weapon was received at your office, there were 4 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber, right?
When the firearm was received?
Yes.
No.
There were 4 in the magazine and then 1 separate cartridge, which is State 16.
That's correct.
Okay. So when you received this firearm, you received it along with 5 unfired cartridges, correct?
They were in separate containers. That's correct.
But you understood these 5 cartridges depicted who have been in the weapon, the type was recovered by the police.
That's the literature on the container, on the bags.
Okay, and so that's not guesswork. That's what you made that assumption based on information you received from the LCD.
Yes.
Now, is there, have you look at number 14 again? There is there's something attached to the trigger that I'd like you to describe to the jury, and it's the little, what would you describe that?
That's called, that little tab there is a trigger safety that's particular to Glock pistols.
Okay. And can this weapon be fired unless that is depressed?
You have to depress that in order to fire this pistol.
Okay. Is there any limitation on how quickly this gun can be fired in reference to that trigger safety?
No.
As an expert in the field of firearms, would you agree with me that this pistol can be fired as fast as when you pull the trigger?
Exactly right.
There is no limitation. It doesn't have to reset in some manner.
No. Well, the firearm does reset when it cycles. On every pull of the trigger, you have to release the trigger and then come back again.
That makes it a semi-automatic pistol versus an automatic pistol, right?
That's correct. If it was, go ahead.
An automatic weapon, I just hold the trigger down and the firearm works itself and fires as many rounds until I release the trigger, right?
Yes, or until you run out of ammunition, correct.
But in this situation, this firearm can be fired as fast as an individual can pull the trigger, right?
Correct.
In your experience with the Glock firearm, especially this weapon, which is employed by law enforcement, an individual, you've never seen a situation where an individual pulls the trigger faster than the gun can operate, right?
No.
Okay, that would be superhuman, right?
It probably wouldn't happen.
Okay. So, for all intents and purposes, every time an individual pulls the trigger, the gun's going to go off, and it's going to continue to fire, so long as I pull the trigger until the ammunition is all extended for the gun, and there's no longer any ammunition in the gun. Right?
Correct.
And with this pistol, and this particular model, you don't have to release the trigger all the way, right? It resets without the trigger being fully reset.
You have to go, I don't know how far you have to release the trigger, but you'll hear an audible click, probably not when you're firing, but you'll hear an audible click when it's reset or when it's in the ready to fire again position.
And this firearm can be fired very rapidly.
Yes.
All right, let's talk for a moment about distance determinations. So when your department received, you are often tasked with determining how close or how far away an item of either clothing or some other sample is from the muzzle of any particular firearm, right?
Yes.
And that's one of the things you do routinely, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you testified a moment ago that in order to make a distance determination, you go through several steps, right?
Yes.
And one of those steps is going to be a visual examination for, let's see, it's leftover either burned gunpowder, unburned gunpowder, or other nitrates that are lead particles that are residual from the operation of the weapon, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so in this case, or in any other case, you'll do the visual determination first, right?
Actually, a visual and then a microscopic.
And there's also some sort of chemical analysis where you soak the whatever item is in chemical, and then if it turns orange, nitrates are present, right?
Yes.
Okay. And all of this is to determine, you're being asked if you can make a determination how far the end of the barrel was from any particular item, right?
Yes.
When the gun was fired, the projectile struck that article of clothing or that body, whatever. Right?
Yes.
And there are a variety of different measurements you make. All of them are ranges, right? Except contact. Contact, there are, if you come in if you find that an item has received a contact shot, either forehead, body, whatever it might be, there's a particular marking on the skin, right?
We don't do, in our laboratory, we don't do distance determination on skin, so.
But there are characteristics of contact wounds, right, or contact characteristics on clothing or skin, right?
Yes.
Okay. And this wasn't a contact wound in this case, was it?
Contact shots into the shirt?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Now, when you begin your analysis, I think you started at about 3 inches, right?
My test firing? Yes.
Okay. And then once you fired at 3 inches, you examine the characteristics, and then if they're not consistent, then you continue to move back.
No, I do all the test firing all in one shot, if you will. When we go to the range, I've created test fire samples, targets already mounted on cardboard folders, and then we'll just shoot them, keep measuring the distance, and just keep increasing the distance on each set of test fires. But we do all the shooting in one session.
Okay. And you made the determination that you believe that the articles of clothing, which were a shirt which had several bullet holes, were using defects on a projectile bullet holes, right?
Yes.
And a pair of sweatpants that you also believe you have one defect or hole from a projectile or a bullet hole, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when we talked a little about the shirt, you indicated you thought there were 8 holes that were defects caused by projectiles, right?
May have been caused by projectiles.
And you surmised, I believe, if you will, that at least a portion of these were entry and a portion of them were exit, right?
I did not.
You didn't?
No.
So the 8 holes in the shirt, you couldn't tell if they were entry or exit defects?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you ever take the shirt and kind of put it back together to make an analysis of maybe some were in the front or some were in the back, or did you not move it forward?
There wasn't enough shirt. It was just pretty much half of a shirt, so that's all I had.
And were you ever asked by anyone to determine which of these might have been entry, which one of these defects might have been exit?
No.
So you testified a moment ago that your determination was the muzzle, the distance from the muzzle to the clothing was at 2 feet or greater, right?
Greater than 2 feet.
Greater than 2 feet. And you can't be more specific than that, can you?
No, I can't.
Whether it was 2 foot 1 inches or 5 feet, 2 foot 1 inches or 5 feet or 10 feet or 20 feet, you can't offer anything more than just greater than 2 feet, right?
That's correct.
Now, in your determination of greater than 2 feet, was there stippling present on these articles of clothing?
Again, stippling, those terms, stippling and tattooing, get mixed up when we're talking about clothing. Usually those two terms, stippling and tattooing, refer to skin, actual skin. So I did not look at skin in this case.
So maybe that's a question for the Office of the Medical Investigator, but there was, you weren't presented with any evidence of stippling or tattooing?
I didn't look at skin.
Okay. May I look at this just for a moment?
You certainly can.
Just for demonstration to the jury, if I'm standing right here, that's about 2 feet, right?
All right. You want to maybe do it at the sides. So
okay.
Just to the back to the jury.
We are just at 2 feet apart, are we not?
I'd say greater than 2 feet from me to you.
Okay. And it's impossible for me to get behind you and get behind the witness box to demonstrate exactly 2 feet, but between me and you, that's greater than 2 feet, is it not?
Yes.
Okay. And your determination can't be any more precise than greater than 2 feet, right?
That's correct.
So from me to you and back, right?
Closer. You're a little closer.
Okay. So closer than you and back.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's talk for a moment, since you qualified as an expert in GSR. GSR is gunshot residue.
Yes.
Okay. And when a firearm is deployed, when I shoot a pistol or I shoot a rifle, there's going to be gunshot residue that travels out the barrel or out the muzzle and downrange, right?
Yes.
There's also going to be GSR or gunshot residue that comes out of the ejector port too, right?
It could, yes.
Okay. And you talked a moment ago when you were asked about testing of hands for gunshot residue, right?
Again, I call it primer residue when we're looking at hands.
Primer residue. But we know what we're talking about when we're talking about gunshot residue. One, gunshot residue is when you test clothing. Primer residue would be on the human body or human hands.
Objection, Your Honor. It was mischaracterization of the witness's testimony. He's the expert in that with the enforced equivalent for.
Again, it's cross-examination, Mr. Byers. Mr. Clark can be, because he hasn't been designated as an expert witness, he can correct if there is any mistake in his responses.
So you would characterize testing hands to be primer residue, testing the body parts to be testing for primer residue?
Yes, hands.
Now, how long, were you aware of that there exist tests for primer residue?
I don't recall if there were or not.
And you told the jury just a moment ago that your department, your office does not test for primer residue.
That's correct.
Right? Are you ever asked to test for primer residue?
Yes.
And what do you tell the department?
We have a list of the agencies that call.
Sure.
If an agency calls looking for a primer residue test, we have a list of other laboratories in the country that we refer them to.
Okay, all right. So maybe I was just confused a moment ago when you were talking about this. It sounded to me like that primer residue test is no longer employed. But what you're telling me, I guess, is that when the department or agency asks you to do a primer residue test, you say, we don't do them here, but here's a whole list of other agencies that can employ such a test, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in order to test for primer residue, the subject to be tested would have to be preserved, would it not?
I believe so.
Okay, and that's a complicated way of saying that would have to be maybe swab, an article, maybe part of the body would have to be swabbed to see if there is, to preserve any sort of primer residue, right? I
would imagine yes.
Okay, and then one of the things, at least I think you can testify to this, is from your time at the APD and your time as a firearms expert, one way to preserve primer residue is perhaps to bag the hands or to make sure an item is secured immediately after the crime or after a gun has been fired, right?
Back again when I was with the APD, that's what we did routinely do. We would usually we had suspects, we would try to swab them very quickly. If we had a decedent that we were suspecting of gunshot residue or firing a firearm, we would bag the hands and then send them off to the medical examiner's office.
And another way to do it would be to talk about swabs would be maybe a swab, tell the jury what a swab is.
Again, referring to the APD, we would, I believe, use a solution, I think it was nitric acid, a weak solution of nitric acid, and drip those on a cotton swab, and then just swab 2 areas of both hands.
That's like a fancy Q-tip, right?
I'm sorry?
It's like a fancy Q-tip, right?
Yes.
And that fancy Q-tip is then put in some sort of container to make sure the sample doesn't deteriorate, right?
Correct.
And then it's shipped off to whatever place does such primer residue tests, right?
Well, when I was with APD, it would come to our laboratory.
But now you give the agency that's asking for it the name of some other lab to send their sample off to be tested, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you get, just based on what you know, do you get requests for primer residue tests in any one year?
Maybe 1 or 2, maybe.
Okay. So, well, it's not an everyday occurrence. It's certainly something, these requests come to you and you respond accordingly, or your agency responds accordingly, right?
Yes.
As far as you know in this case, did the LCPD or any other law enforcement agency that was working in conjunction with the district attorney's office ever make a request to have any primer residue test conducted by your office?
Not to me.
Okay. Same question, to the best of your knowledge, did anyone associated with LCPD or associated with any other law enforcement agency or the district attorney's office ask you for a referral for another lab that may be able to conduct a primer residue?
I didn't.
And that means you're not aware of any such request?
I'm not aware.
Okay. Was any other, to the best of your knowledge, was there any other individual employed as a tool mark or a tool mark expert or employed by your office in any other way concerning this case?
Nobody else. Not a firearm tool mark examiner. I did all the firearm tool mark work in this case.
And you would be aware, I think, if somebody else was doing work on this case other than you, right? Regarding your gun.
Yes.
You had exclusive purview over this material. This gun, this was your job. This was your item you tested. You tested the bullets. You tested the casings. This was your gun, right?
This is my case, yes.
Thank you. As always, pass the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Byers, redirect examination, Mr. Guerra.
Thank you.
Witness to approach the jury with State's Exhibit 13, Your Honor.
I would like this, Mr. Byers.
Sir?
For what purpose?
To show the jurors where the ejector is.
Go ahead, proceed, Mr. Guerra.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You may want to do it in stages, at least 2 stages, so that all the jurors can see clearly.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You wanted me to point out the ejector?
Yes, sir.
The ejector, you can see the white bar that's sticking up on the left side of the slide. Right above it. That's the ejector. That's what kicks that cartridge case out of the fire.
Thank you, Mr. Guerra.
Thank you, Your Honor. Directly, we're taking State's Exhibit 15, Mr. Guerra, on the screen.
Yes.
The pin is pointing to the ejector that you just finished showing the jury, correct?
Yes.
Now, that's on the left-hand side of the pistol if you're looking from rear to front, correct?
Yes.
And its location on the pistol is on the left-hand side, and that's what causes the pistol to eject the cartridge and expend the casing to the right-hand side, correct?
It works in conjunction with the extractor that's on the right-hand side. It's hard to see in that photograph, but it's almost directly across. That's the claw or grip that grips that rim of that cartridge case on one side and is drawing it out of the chamber as it's being extracted out. And then it runs it into the ejector on the opposite side, and that's what kicks it out.
Now, Mr. Clark, on cross-examination, was asking you about modifications to block handguns. If this particular handgun, State's Exhibit 13, were to be modified in such a way that the shell casing would eject to the left, what would have to be done?
Like I said, if you were to do that, I would imagine you'd have to replace the whole top slide, and actually portions of the ejector is molded into the frame. So I don't think there's a way to do it, to be honest with you. You'd have to pretty much redesign and flip everything to the opposite side, have another whole ejection port on the left side. So I don't think there's a way to do that.
And you conduct ejection pattern tests, correct?
I do that.
And what would the effect of the results of an ejection pattern test be if the pistol were oriented in a manner other than directly vertical?
With ejection pattern tests, it's a test that we do to locate, in general terms, where a firearm is going to eject cartridge cases, where they're going to land. So when we do this test, we keep the gun pointed straight out and don't move it from that position, and just notate where the cartridge casings are landing when they're being ejected out. But if you rotate or move the orientation of the firearm, that's going to affect where they're going to come out. If I rotate it to the left, they're going to go more straight up. If I hold it upside down, they may go to the left. So depending on the orientation of the firearm, how it's being held, will depict on where the cartridge casings are going to end up.
If I can have a moment, John, I'm looking for this is the question. Trying to previously marked as States Exhibit 14. During cross-examination, Mr. Clark was talking about the trigger. And in particular, this little bar that protrudes up above the main body of the trigger, which would be this larger section. Is there anything particular about Glock and their safe action pistols?
They have three basic automatic safeties in the pistol. The one that's shown here is the trigger safety. Again, in order to fire this pistol, you must depress the trigger, and automatically that little bar will be pushed out of the way and release the trigger to allow it to go to the rear. So that's what it's designed. If you grab on the edges of the trigger and try to pull it back without depressing that little bar, the trigger won't go to the rear. So you have to naturally, when you pull the trigger, that bar will be depressed.
Now, you were describing pulling the trigger to the rear. Once in the firing sequence, when the trigger is pulled completely to the rear and it disengages the striker in this case, that trigger has to travel back forward, is that correct?
Has to come forward?
Yes.
Yes.
What happens if the shooter does not let the trigger travel forward far enough for the mechanism to reset?
It won't fire.
So then is it possible that a shooter can pull the trigger to the rear, not let the trigger travel far enough for it to reset, and then attempt to try to pull it back again?
Yes.
So when Mr. Clark was asking you, is it possible for a person to pull the trigger faster than the gun can shoot, then it is possible for a person to pull the trigger faster than the gun can shoot because they did not let the trigger travel back far enough forward in order to reset.
I guess a person could stay in that zone, if you will, that small area, and just wiggle your finger back and forth until it gets to that reset point. I guess you could do that, yes.
But it's also understood that there are people who can shoot pistols faster than others, correct?
Sure.
So if you practice, if you train.
Yeah, sure.
There are shooting competitions that are held around the world and throughout all of the
elements. Sustained, I think the point is been made. Thank you.
Now let's talk about primer residue. You've established that your agency does not conduct primer residue tests, but in your experience, both as a police officer and a firearm and tool mark expert, is it possible for primer residue to be lost? For example, if a person were to discharge a firearm and then they wash their hands, would that do away with any primer residue?
It could.
If a person were to discharge a firearm and wipe their hands on something, would that do away with any primer residue?
It could.
Is primer residue delicate?
Yes.
So if a person's hands were bloody, copious amounts of blood, could that account for a lack of the presence of any primer residue?
It could.
It could also just as equally be that there was no primer residue there at all in the first place, right?
That's true.
You're a scientist, right?
Yes, sir.
And the purpose of science, the purpose of testing is either to confirm or disprove a certain hypothesis, right?
Yes.
And the reason items, whatever they are submitted to you is to determine whether said hypothesis is true or not, right?
Yes.
In this case, the hypothesis that was posited to you was this is the firearm, or you would determine whether this firearm fired these projectiles that struck Gary Martin, right?
Yes.
And you can't determine whether something is true or not, whether a hypothesis is yes or no, whether something happened or not, unless it's tested, right?
Yes.
Because you don't guess, right?
No.
You don't guesstimate about something. You don't look at something and say, well, that might be possible, right?
No.
You're asked to conduct a test, and you do so, right?
Yes.
And that's how science works, right?
Yes, sir.
You employ very specific means of control because you want to get it right, correct?
Yes.
And nobody asked you to do a gunshot, a primer residue test, right?
That's correct.
Because had they done so, you would have said, no, these other labs around the country or even around the state can do so, right?
Calls for speculation.
He's already said they could.
I can overrule the objection. It's an expert witness. He can certainly give an opinion.
Correct. If somebody, if Los Cruces Police Department or anybody else asked you, can you do this primer residue test, you would have said, we don't do it here, but here's a list of labs with the phone numbers and their addresses, and they can talk to you about it, and they can do it for you if you so desire, right?
Yes.
Because to speculate is dangerous, right?
Yes.
Because to speculate is dangerous because you can get it wrong, right?
That's correct.
Because you don't guess, and you're not guessing about gunshot residue or primer residue in this case, are you?
No.
Because you don't do that because it's not proper, right?
That's correct.
So when you're asked, had you been asked about primer residue, you would have said, call these guys, they can help you, but that request never came to your office, right?
Never came to me.
Never came to you, and you're not aware of any other requests by any law enforcement, LCPD or otherwise about primer residue.
Mr. Clark, you can hear an objection being made.
Oh, I'm sorry, I heard this.
And I'm going to sustain the objection, asked and answered several times.
May I ask one more question about,
As long as it's not the same question. Okay.
when someone asks you about primer residue testing, do you provide phone numbers?
Yes.
Are there primer residue testing facilities in New Mexico?
I don't think there are any in New Mexico.
But certainly they exist in the continental United States.
Yes.
Your experience, what does primer residue look like if it's visible to the naked eye?
It's not visible to the naked eye. It's not.
That's why we test it to determine whether it's present.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Does the jury have any questions of Mr. Guerra? Go ahead. You can write your questions out, please. And again, make sure you sign the sheet of paper and provide your jury number. Mr. Clark and Mr. Myers, would you please approach the bench? the jury has questions of you. Explain the use of the slide on the gun and when you have to use it. Do you understand the context?
I think so.
All right, go ahead.
May I use the pistol?
If you want to use the weapon to demonstrate, you certainly may.
Thank you, Your Honor. The slide rides up on top of the frame. What the slide does is it houses, first of all, it houses the firing pin that fires the cartridge. It also houses the extractor, and the extractor is that claw part that grabs the rim of the cartridge case. The slide also holds the barrel. So when you first initially load this pistol, you load the magazine with cartridges and insert it into the magazine well, which is in the grip. Then you grip this serrated area of the slide and pull it back. It's under spring pressure. So you pull it back and then you release it. You just let it go. When you do that, it will strip off a cartridge and load it into the chamber. In addition to that, this slide it has to lock with the barrel. The barrel is free-floating. It's a separate part than the slide. So they have to lock together for a brief moment during firing. I don't know if you can see from there, but when I pull the slide back, you can see how that barrel is kind of tilting down a little bit. That is the mechanical lockup that has to occur between the slide and the barrel. So when the cartridge is fired, that firing pin releases, strikes that cartridge, strikes the primer, fires the cartridge. That for that moment they stay locked until the bullet leaves the barrel. At that point it unlocks from the barrel and the slide travels to the rear from the pressure of the cartridge being fired. Again, not only is it driving the bullet out the barrel, but it's driving that slide to the rear. It's a lot of pressure. So that pushes it back to the rear and then recocks the firearm or resets the firearm, and then is driven back forward again under spring pressure to load the next round if you have one in the magazine. But that's the purpose of the slide. It functions in that respect.
Thank you. The chemical testing of the gunshot residue, the orange dots, did they come from the back or the front of the articles tested? And I know that you addressed it earlier, but if you could elaborate for the jury.
When the particles are coming out of the muzzle of the firearm, and let's say the target is close enough or the clothing is close enough to the muzzle of the firearm, they're going to attach to the front of the firearm where the bullet made the entry. So it's the exterior part of the clothing. It would be like on my shirt, it would be the exterior part. So I would look on the outside of the shirt to look for those particles. So usually they're visible. Sometimes the articles of clothing that we get are bloody or dark. So that's why we use these chemical tests to show up these particles. So I'll take the photographic paper and I'll lay it on the outside. Say I have a hole right here by my pocket. I'll lay it on the outside and then lay it all down. Then I'll put that other chemical soaked into a cloth material on the back side of my shirt and then iron it. So those fumes from those chemicals in that other piece of material will soak through the garment, through the clothing, and wherever there's a nitrite particle or burned gunpowder particle on the outside, it will show up on that piece of photographic paper. Does that make sense?
Yes, but again, did they come from the back or the front of the articles tested?
So they come from the front. From the front of the shirt, being in contact with that photographic paper, it comes right from the outside, the front of it.
Okay, and there may be a little bit more of an explanation. They may be talking about. Okay, well, no, that should be the response. Mr. Byers, you wish to approach? Yes, go ahead, Mr. Byers. further elaboration that's necessary. I believe that the jury is asking, when you tested the actual clothing, was it the front or back of the shirt or pants, whatever you tested?
The shirt had holes, like I said, in the front and on the back and on the side of the portion of shirt that I had. So I tested the exterior side of the front and back. Wherever there was a hole, I tested that exterior side of that garment. And the same thing with the pants. The exterior side of the pants, not the inside, but the exterior side. As a matter of fact, I think I mentioned that I had a pair of athletic shorts that aligned, the hole in the rear aligned with that hole in the exterior side of the warm-up pants. I didn't test the shorts because they're inside. The gunpowder particles would not reach it because it had to go through the warm-up pants. So I didn't do that.
Okay, so when you found residue, is that correct? You found residue, gunshot residue, on one of the articles of the clothing. Is that correct?
On one on the shirt, on the sleeve, and then one on the pants on the knee.
Okay, but I believe the jury is asking, did you find it on the front of the shirt or the back of the shirt, the front of the pants or the back of the pants?
Okay. The one on the shirt was on the sleeve, on the exterior side of the sleeve. The one on the pants was on the left knee, on the exterior side of the left knee.
The exterior?
Exterior side. Not on the back side, on the front. But it was near a hole that was not, did not look like a gun, passive, it was made by the passage of a bullet. It was just a wear area.
So what the testimony, just to simplify it, is that the gunshot residue that you found was on the sleeve of the shirt, when you say the side?
Yes.
The sleeve of the shirt and the front knee area of the pants.
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the jury have any further questions of this witness? Let's go. Let me have the attorney's approach. terms of helping to clarify issues for the jury to the extent that you can. At what distance would gun residue not likely be projected on an individual's clothing?
That depends on the firearm and the ammunition being used. There's no general term, no general distance.
Are you able to, in particularly what we've been discussing related to a Glock firearm, are you able to answer the question related to that specific firearm?
I know that I fired distances out to, I believe it was, excuse me, may I check my notes?
Yes, please.
I test fired out to 6 foot distance, and I'm shooting at a piece of material that's approximately 1 foot square. I still got some nitride reactions at 6 foot.
Thank you. But you went no further than that.
That's correct.
And from your prior experiences related to testing involving a Glock firearm that is similar to Exhibit 13, have you ever been able to identify gunshot residue beyond the 6 foot area?
I don't know.
Because you don't recall?
I don't recall, in particular, a Glock pistol shooting out to that distance. That's correct.
Thank you. Can anything else cause a positive gun residue or GSR test?
So we are looking for, again, a nitrite particle. There are nitrites in nature. That's why we look for gunpowder particles associated with a bullet hole. So yes, there are some things that are nitrites in nature. Maybe some detergents, but again, we look in conjunction with a bullet hole.
All right, maybe be specific to your testing in this matter. Do you believe that anything else may have caused the positive test?
No.
What, in your opinion, were the particles, or what I'm assuming we're discussing, the gunshot residue, on that one area of clothing and not the rest? Again, I believe that there may be some confusion related to the number of what you had originally anticipated or believed to be tearing or holes in the material that appeared to be related to a bullet or a cartridge, or yes, a bullet. But then you testified that the only place you found gunshot residue was on the shoulder and then on the hands. Why not the other areas, in your expert opinion?
In my opinion, I didn't find them on the other areas because the distance was too great. Maybe there weren't many there and they could have come off from the handling of the garment. That's why my range is so broad. So I have to take that into account. At my 2 foot distance, I had a nice pattern, a very nice, fairly good pattern of gunshot residues. So if the pattern would have been at that distance, I would have expected to see that on the clothing, on the evidence. At my 3 foot distance, the particles started to really dissipate, fall off very greatly. So they were less dense. So taking into account the handling, the blood on the garment, that's why my distance is what it is. So if I'm showering something with a lot of nitrites at distances, maybe they're going to land in different spots. Again, remember, I'm only shooting at a 1 foot square target. So even at 6 foot, I'm still getting a few nitrites. But there could be a few outliers making it downrange but not hitting on my target. So that's how I would explain that maybe a couple of them made it.
Any further questions by the jury? I will permit the parties limited questions as follow-ups to any of the questions that the jury asked. Again, let me appeal to you. Don't ask the same questions that you may have already asked previously. But Mr. Byers, do you wish any additional questions of this witness?
Yes, sir. If I have just a moment.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Guerra, when a firearm discharges, is it fair to say that there's a cloud of gases and particulate matter that's released from the combustion of the powder and the primer and everything that goes predominantly out of the barrel of the pistol?
Yes.
If a firearm is discharged in succession in a not confined, but in a particularized location, could some of that particulate matter still be in the air if the person is moving?
Probably not the gunpowder particles because they're heavier, more dense. They'll probably fall to the ground very quickly. But maybe some vaporous lead, which is smoke, if you get much smoke, would still be in the air.
So are you in a position to be able to tell the jury that Mr. Martin, our victim in this case, was facing facing Mr. Chan when the defendant fired the firearm?
I'm not in that position.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, any additional questions based on the questions asked by the jury?
Mr. Guerra, just one question I just need to clarify. So your findings were that the muzzle was greater than 2 feet, right?
Yes.
And did you say you stopped testing at 6 feet?
Yes.
Okay, so all you can testify to today to the jury is that you believe the muzzle distance from the shirt was between greater than 2 feet, but you stopped testing at 6. It was 2 to 6?
No. I'm saying it was greater than 2 on the shirt and on the pants.
Greater than 2 on the shirt and pants, and you stopped testing at 6 feet?
That's correct.
Okay, so you didn't test anywhere beyond 6 feet?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. We're going to go ahead and, Mr. Guerra, thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Mr. Byers and Mr. Clark, can Mr. Guerra be excused?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you again, and you have no further responsibilities.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We're going to go ahead and leave recess. We'll take our recess at this time.
Please rise for jury.
Recess for just 15 minutes.
Can we approach this in one?
Or do you want to hold it until we come out of recess? Because I actually have a couple of matters I'll address before we bring the next one.
No, sir. Thank you.
I'll try not to get my hair in your way.
Please rise.
Thank you for taking the case. Let me just address the matter. I know that Mr. Day will have some as well. The court had admitted into evidence states exhibits 1 through 29 and then 31 through 77. But I believe at the time I was looking at the state's first amended exhibit list. In reviewing the state's second exhibit list, item number 1, or exhibit number 1, is listed as a photograph of Jeremy Martin. But then A, B, and C, there's 1A, 1B, 1C, and although I didn't designate them specifically, I did admit into evidence exhibit number 1. I'm assuming that the parties, or is there an agreement to A1, AB, AC?
No, Judge, there's not.
So
Those were text messages that were specifically objected to.
No, I know. That's why I'm raising it again, to make sure we go back and clarify the issue. Because I don't think that was the stipulation of the parties.
No, you're right, Judge.
Although what was stipulated to is exhibits 1 through.
Right. No number, no letters, no numbers of letters.
Again, I'm just going to note that then, based on what I will accept as the court's error, because I was looking at the state's first amended exhibit list, what was originally listed as the state's exhibit number 1, the photograph of Jeremy Martin, that is pre-admitted. Exhibits 1A, 1B, or 1C are still subject to further review or further discussion, and they are not pre-admitted. Okay, so Mr. Day, you had forgive me, Mr. Byers, were you going to mention something?
No, Your Honor, I wasn't. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Day, you said that you had a preliminary matter. Do you wish to approach the bench, or do you want to just discuss it?
Discuss it from here.
Do you mind getting go in front of the microphone, please? I'm sorry.
Your Honor, and Mr. Ciso and I worked on this. It took both of us to figure this out. But during the cross of the next witness, we've got an easel with a poster board. We were just going to position it sort of right parallel with Mr. Clark here, so that everyone can see.
Although, if you're wanting the jury to see that distance, the writing really better be big.
Or we can move it closer. We just couldn't find a location where we would block somebody.
Well, my sense is that you bring it up here. You're talking about the easel.
Let me get it down.
Okay. I'm assuming it would be over here to the left side of the court. That potentially is the site. I know that it might block a little bit some of the media and their coverage, but you might want to consider that as an alternate site, because you're going to want to have your witness. If we could maybe move a microphone over here on the railing, then the witness could stand over here by the railing, although it would block out some of the perspective of the defense. But unless it's really big writing, I can tell you that the jurors will struggle seeing it.
Maybe we can try to make sure it's big. We're not doing a lot of writing, it's just enough, but it's closer to the witness, and it would be easier to do.
What will be depicted?
The diagram, just have a witness do the diagram.
And again, either you can do it over here, and if we can just move a microphone, which I believe that we can, or no, can't. Okay, so this would certainly move out there. Do this, or we can use a laser pointer, and and I'm sure we have that, so that your witness can still sit there and point to whatever he wants, whatever this
Well, we're simply going to have a witness, and probably another witness today also, just use that to, all right, I'll make sure they draw date. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Regarding that matter, could we just make sure that we require with each one of the jurors or the jurors in general that they're all able to see that? I want to make sure that nobody is impairment of their sight and eye to see that do it in that distance. Don't do that at the center.
Okay. I haven't detected any, but you're correct. There could be some jurors that may not be able to see the distance, although if they have their glasses, they may be able to overcome that.
Yeah, you want this moved back right now?
No, we don't want.
Okay, so the next witness, let's see, the next witness is going to be Mr. Edward Hazelwood. Do we have Mr. Hazelwood available? If not, if we could bring him forward, please, Mr. Dean.
Well, the judge, you have that indicated that Mr. Pringle.
That's correct.
Judge, since you have the new witness list, are you still requiring me to announce to the court who's the next and who is?
No, sir. No, sir. I can go directly to who's ever taking on that responsibility. Mr. Hazelwood, good morning. Good morning. I'd like you to take your seat, but we're going to bring the jury in, so why don't you please stand and so that I can administer your oath to you after we bring them in. Thank you. Take your seats, please. Mr. Hazelwood, let me ask you to please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of law?
Yes, I do.
All right. Thank you very much. Please make yourself comfortable. Come up to the microphone. You can adjust it to whatever height that you wish. Why don't you begin this morning? Go ahead and start yourself.
Thank you.
Please begin this morning by giving us your full and complete name, the spelling of your last name as well.
Edward Bruce Hazelwood, Haselwood.
All right, thank you. Mr. Pringle, can you commence with your direct examination of Mr. Hazelwood?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Hazelwood.
Good morning.
Mr. Hazelwood, where do you currently reside?
504 Applewood Drive, Manhattan, Kansas.
And Mr. Hazelwood, what kind of work do you do?
I am self-employed. I work on underground storage tanks, like at a convenience store. I do testing of the lines and associated equipment and corrosion or cathodic protection equipment associated with the tank systems.
Okay. And Mr. Hazelwood, we're going to go back in time a bit to October of 2014. Mr. Hazelwood, were you in Las Cruces, New Mexico, in October of 2014?
Yes, I was.
And more specifically, Mr. Hazelwood, were you in Las Cruces on October 27th of 2014?
We had flown into El Paso and had rented a car and had driven up to a hotel in Las Cruces to teach a class the next day.
Okay. And were you here for a conference or for a training?
I was to be the teacher of a class on how to operate underground storage tanks.
Okay. And you recall the name of the hotel that you stayed at?
I cannot specifically off the top of my head recall the name of the hotel.
And you got a reservation at that hotel?
Yes, we had reservations at the hotel.
And
Forgive me, Mr. Brinkley, coming a little bit more to the microphone.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Brinkley.
And did you make a reservation at this hotel or someone else made a reservation?
The person I travel with, our education coordinator, made the reservations at the hotel.
And you called out what time you checked into that hotel?
Later part of the afternoon, 3, 4, 5, before 5 o'clock, I know that.
In your room that you stayed in, was it, you recall the floor, was it at the top of the hotel or in the basement?
It was the top floor, I believe the 7th floor of the hotel.
Okay. So, after my arrival and checking into the hotel, and you had a room on the 7th floor, what did you do after that?
I think I went up into my room and relaxed for a little bit, and then early evening went down to the restaurant bar in the hotel and had supper.
Okay.
And then went back to my room.
Okay. You recall about the time you returned to your room?
I don't know, before 7, I believe.
You stayed in your room all night?
Yes.
Mr. Hazelwood, at some point in time when you were in your room that evening, you decided time to go to bed?
I think I watched TV. I may, after supper, had walked around the grounds a little bit and then went back to my room. I probably watched TV till around 10 p.m. And then I think I may have the TV off, so.
Okay. At that point in time, did you go to bed?
Yes.
And of course, at some point in time, shortly thereafter, you fall asleep.
Yes, I did surprisingly well that night.
So after falling asleep, did you hear anything that caused you to wake up?
Yes.
Mr. Hazelwood, could you describe in detail, in as much detail as possible, to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what it was that caused you to wake up?
I initially woke up to shouting as part of an argument. When earlier in the evening it was a nice evening, and I remember opening the hotel window up. Beautiful night out, I was enjoying the night air. And when I first woke up, I travel quite a bit with my business, and I literally thought, oh, I left the window open in the hotel, and I stay in a lot of different hotels, generally more working class hotels associated with my work. And I literally thought I'm in Kansas City, and there's an apartment building, and there's an altercation going into the apartment building. The lighting was very sharp. It seemed like it was I don't know if there was more people present at the time, but it just seemed right there that there were two people in a heated face-to-face argument. And that was quickly followed by, I heard a sound of disbelief, of either, oh my God, or oh no, something to that effect that made me think there was a weapon or a gun present at that point. And that was quickly followed by a single shot. At that point, I heard some scuffling, and then I heard a volley of 3 or 4 shots that followed that. And then I'm starting to realize I'm not in Kansas City. This is pretty close to me, a lot closer than an apartment complex nearby. The initial shot, I thought that until I heard the scuffling and then the next volley of shots. After that first volley of shots, I heard somebody run by my hotel door from the right to the left. If I was facing the door, running down the hall, very heavy steps, and I could hear moaning or disbelief and something. Don't ask me what they were saying, but it was the same voice that I'd heard the disbelief before. And they went down the hallway from my right to the left if I was facing my hotel door, and as after that footsteps running down the hallway, I heard another volley of shots of 4 or 5 shots that followed that. Immediately following that, I heard someone say very clearly, very distinctively, "Call 911." And I was still in bed at that point, and my first thought was, I got to teach a class tomorrow. I need to get sleep still a little bit, but then immediately like somebody's hurt out there. And I went to the door thinking, do I need to call somebody? And I did. For some reason I went towards the door and I could hear somebody down at the end of the hallway to my left, very labored, moaning, nearly crying, "I can't believe this has happened," or something to that effect. "I can't believe this has happened to me." And they were in a great amount of pain and suffering.
Mr. Hassel, I'm going to stop you there. This voice that you heard down the hallway after the 911, do you believe that to be the same voice you heard initially?
Yes, it was the same voice that I heard the initial disbelief after the start of the argument that made me think a gun was present. Same voice that I heard run down the hallway.
And Mr. Hazelwood, for you, please allow the attorney to complete the question, although you already know what your response is going to be.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr.
Mr. Hazelwood, have you had any experience handling handguns or firearms in your lifetime?
Just some target practicing with friends. I had one for a while when I was in my 20s, sold it. Listening to guns, where I grew up at, where my mom still lives, it was an old air base that had closed in the 70s, and then the city of Topeka had taken the firing range at the air base and made it their shooting range. So I'm definitely well acquainted with the sound of a lot of gunshot.
Okay, thank you. And you said that the initial shouting that you heard prior to any gunshots, was that, you said you heard how many voices?
I know I heard 2 distinct different voices initially.
Male or female?
Both male.
Did they sound like they were in an argument?
A very sharp argument.
Okay. But you were able to tell exactly what they were saying?
No.
And from the perspective of your room, for your work at the time, where was this shouting and what you perceived to be an argument coming from?
Like I said, initially when I first woke up groggy, I thought it was window open somewhere else. But as the first shot rang out and heard the scuffling, I realized laying in bed, I was laying back in bed, and it was this direction from my head. So
Toward your door?
Towards my door and then to the right. If I would stand up facing the door, it would be towards the door, a little bit towards the door, but then to my right if I would have stood up.
And just, you mentioned that initially you heard something you interpreted as being something of disbelief. Could you elaborate on that if possible?
The very sharp, heated argument, all of a sudden one of the voices changed drastically to, "Oh my God," or something like that, and I knew there was fear in that voice, that something had changed.
Was it, you made a determination, or you had a feeling, was it based on the tone of the voice as opposed to the exact words you heard?
Sustained.
How did you arrive at that decision?
There was either an inflection, a tonal change, something different. Instead of anger, the way the words were said changed drastically.
And you said you heard a gunshot. The initial gunshot that you heard, was it one shot?
Yes, the initial, after the words of disbelief, it was one single shot, followed by some scuffling, and then a volley of 3 or 4 shots after that.
And you said there were two volleys of shots, is that correct?
Yes.
And the 2 volleys of shots, do you remember, at least within a range, how many shots were within each volley?
There was a single shot, scuffling, then the first volley of 3 or 4 shots, then the footsteps going down the hallway, followed by another volley that was 4 or 5 shots, but more in the second volley than the first one.
And was there a break or a pause of any amount of time between the 2 volleys?
A short break, because like I said, I could remember the first volley, then the footsteps going down the hallway from my right to the left, and then followed by the second volley of shots.
Mr. Hazelwood, was there an elevator on the floor that you had read the movement?
Yes.
And where was the elevator in relationship to your room?
If I come out my door, it was to the left.
And which end of the hall were you at?
I think-
In relationship to the elevator?
If I remember right, I was kind of the middle of the hallway. If you come off the elevator, you could go either 1 or 2 directions, and I was, if you headed basically straight out the elevator, down that hallway, and I'm thinking halfway down, I don't know, maybe 2/3 the way down the hall.
And it was your room on, coming out of the elevator, as you just described, was your room on the left-hand side of the hall or the right-hand side?
Be on the right-hand side of the hall.
Halfway down?
Yes,
And you said that was on the 7th floor?
that is correct, or the top floor anyway.
And when you said that you heard some running, were you able to tell which direction that person was running?
Yes, as if I would face my hotel door room, they ran from my right to my left, which would have been in the direction of the elevator.
Is your belief that that was the same person that you heard moaning and groaning?
Yes, I do.
And were you able, the person you heard moaning and groaning, and you now testified was going toward the elevator, do you recall any specific words?
No, I do not. When, after the last volley of shots and hearing someone say, call 911, waking myself up, somebody may be hurt out there, you know, it was, knowing is like something's happened, and I remember then going to the door, and the words that I heard were, I can't believe this is happening. It was very labored, and I don't remember the exact words.
Okay. And Mr. Hazelwood, at any point in time, did you call 911?
I did not. After I went to the door, heard the moaning, I went back to find my phone, room's dark, and whether it was when I got to the end of the bed or for some reason I looked out the window, my window of my hotel room faced the entrance of the hotel area, and as I looked out the window, I saw 2 police cars, no sirens on, were already at the facility. And that drew me onto the window. As I looked out the window, I saw the officers running into the building. Then I saw a lady officer run back out, grab something out of their car, and immediately sprint back in with a bag.
So you already knew that was right?
Yes.
And Mr. Hazelwood, some point in time did you, after hearing what you heard and saw the police arrive, did you leave your room?
No, not until the next morning. That was not knowing what had happened. When I looked and saw the 2 police cars with no sirens on, I could also see coming down the road, I believe from the north, a whole string of emergency vehicles with sirens on coming. And I remember at that point getting jeans on, shoes on, not knowing if I would have to leave in a hurry. I remember looking out the window and thinking, I'm standing here in the window in an emergency with a white t-shirt on. That's probably not the smartest thing to do. And I remember getting fully dressed at that point, but then waiting, you know, not knowing what the dangers were at that point.
At some point in time, later that morning, did you learn where this alleged incident actually occurred?
I don't know how much time had passed. Finally, you could hear commotion again on the floor coming from the direction of the elevators. And you could hear a lot of people. I knew a canine officer and canine were going past because they were talking about it. And when I realized how close everything was, they shouted out the room next to mine and then shouted out my room number asking if the two were connected.
And when you heard all that, you stayed in your room?
My first thought was, I want the officers in here with me at that point. And literally I went, kind of looked through the people and thought, okay, they're right there. I'm going to open them in and let them see there's no. Then there was nobody there, so I shut it again. And then I think they say, hey, there's somebody opening. And then I opened again, there was still nobody there. And then they knocked on the door. I opened it. Two officers at the door, one with a rifle trained at my head. And the other officer, I was standing there holding the door open at that point with one hand up, and he was kind of smirking at me like, oh, this is safe. And they just asked, is there anybody else in the room? I said, no. And I don't know if they asked if the rooms were connected, but they had figured that out, and they said, then stay in the room, there'll be somebody up later at this point.
Okay. Hold on a second.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Pringle. Mr. Day, cross-examination, Mr. Hazelwood.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, you may. Let me inform the jury that the easel is going to be used, but it's going to be positioned closer to Mr. Hazelwood. I'll need to just give you just a little sign if you're having difficulty seeing what's on the easel. So let me see if any of you perhaps have glasses and might want to put them on in order to see the distance. But let me know if you're having any difficulty, please. Go ahead, Mr. Day.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. You pronounce your last name Hazelwood, is that right?
That is correct.
All right, Mr. Hazelwood, good morning. You've been asked several times previous to today to recount what you saw and what you heard that evening, right?
Yes, I have.
And Mr. Hazelwood, forgive me, don't let your voice drop down too low, please.
Okay.
Mr. Hazelwood, you were in room 709 that night, is that right?
I believe I was, yes.
And that room 709 was next door to room 711 in that hallway, right?
That is correct.
And so therefore you were on the same side of the hallway as room 711, right?
That is correct.
And just to make sure I get the sequence correct, you heard one pop, right? Gunshot.
One shot.
And then you heard another volley, what you thought was a volley of gunshots and then running, right?
That is correct.
And then you heard what you thought was another volley of shots, is that right?
That is correct.
And there was just seconds between those volleys, right?
Yes, the first shot to the first volley was, like I said, there was a little bit of scuffling, but it was it seemed like a very short duration between the one single shot and then the 3 or 4 shots. And then enough time to hear the person run by my door down the hallway, then that was followed by the last volley of shots, which was a longer volley.
There was some heavy, the running was distinct to you, you heard it, it was fast.
I don't know how fast, the footsteps were very heavy. Heavy enough that in my mind upon hearing that, I actually envisioned a heavy set person running down the hall. They were just very boom, boom, but.
And prior to that first shot, you heard what sounded like 2 men arguing, right?
That is correct.
And you thought it was 2 male voices that were just nose to nose or face to face, right?
That would be, yes, an accurate description.
And you believe that these 2 men were pretty mad at each other?
Pretty heated, very short time period, but yeah, right there was an initial burst of anger, it sounded like from both people.
And you believed it did sound exactly like 2 people just right in each other's faces, correct?
Yes.
You're going to approach the easel a little bit. You may.
Now, maybe a question.
Yes, go ahead. Mr. Hazelwood, and again, Mr. Day, I'm going to ask you because you're not in front of the microphone. Actually, can you revive the microphone next to you? Yes. And that, I believe, will assist everyone to hear you. But still speak up because you're a little bit of a distance from the microphone. Will do, Your Honor.
Mr. Hazelwood, can I ask the witness to come down to the easel, Judge?
Yes, and Mr. Hazelwood, if I can impose upon you to move the microphone. Well, let me do this, Mr. Hazelwood. Mr. Hazelwood, they're going to ask you, I believe, to try to depict, and I'm assuming that it's related to the 7th floor of the hotel, I believe, I'm not sure. Go ahead and draw whatever you need, but don't talk. Don't try to explain it as you're going along. If they ask you to draw something, please do so. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is return to your chair, and so that you're testifying and explaining right into the microphone. And I'm going to ask that you be provided with a laser pointer. Okay. So as you're drawing, we're going to get a laser pointer. That way you can keep your seat
testifying and pointing at items with a laser pointer. Please understand that it's difficult to bring the easel a lot closer, so make it as big as you can, but trying to keep it to the scale as you remember.
Judge, and let me approach this briefly. Sure. Put my focus in make this easy. Mr. Hazelwood, I'm going to ask you if you could just quickly, using this marker, draw the hotel corridor, 2 parallel lines, and then show us where room 709 was, and then draw another X where 711 was. Is that okay? And actually, you don't have to draw the inside. You can just show us where the rooms were. That's 709. That was your room. Okay. All right. And before you sit down,
again, I don't want him testifying there without the microphone.
All right. Go ahead and take your seat if that's all right.
Just so we're sure, or you can go to the podium, whatever is the better vantage point. In fact, Mr. Hazelwood, let me ask you if you don't mind going to the podium where that microphone is, and then that way, Mr. Day, you can turn a little bit to the microphone. Okay. You can ask questions, and if you need to depict something, Mr. Hazelwood, just point at it with a laser.
All right, Mr. Hazelwood, now you said you heard the shots and then the footsteps running past your room. Is that right?
That is correct.
You mind if I mark on your drawing? Is that okay? Or just, it was going from 7-Eleven down this way. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. I'm going to put an arrow. Let me use a different color. That direction. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And then you said you heard.
So just for the record, the footsteps that you heard were going in a direction where the numbering of the room was diminishing or going down. It is small.
That would be correct.
Okay. Just so that we have a description for the record.
Very good. All right, and I think I can ask Mr. Hazelwood to take the seat now, Judge. At this
Okay.
point. That's okay. Thank you. You heard Mr. Hazelwood, after those footsteps passed, you heard 2 distinctive sounds, didn't you? You heard the muffled the sound of someone in agony, right?
That is correct.
You also heard, in a different location, you heard someone saying, call 911, right?
That is correct.
And they were different people making those sounds in your estimation, right?
That is correct.
And you believe that the person saying call 911 was in the opposite direction of where you could hear the moaning and the agonizing sounds, right?
That is correct.
And so you believe that the person who was saying call 911 was saying that closer to room 711 than the other end of the hallway, correct?
It was to my right if I was facing the door, which would be in the direction of 7-Eleven or something in the hallway, another room in that area.
Okay, may I approach the easel, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
So, Mr. Hazelwood, under that scenario, can you come up and see? Sorry.
Yeah, I cannot.
The person saying call 911 would have been up in this area
Again, why don't you move the microphone if you're going to do it that way? The thing is, the closer you get, give Mr. Hazelwood back the laser pointer.
Yes, sir.
That way you can step away from the easel and not obstruct the vision of any of the jurors. So step back over here to, oh, yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Use the podium.
Yes.
So could you show us with that laser pointer if it's working, what area around room 711 you believed you heard the person saying, call 911?
I believe. I believe I would have still been in bed when I heard that after the last volley of shots. I heard a clear and concise voice somewhere in this area. But it was to this direction of me where I heard call 911.
And again, just for the record, in the direction of the room 711 or in that general vicinity.
That general vicinity. I could not say it was in the room next to me. It was just in laying in bed. It was to that same direction where the area the shots came from or thereabout.
And Mr. Hazelwood, at that point, you had already heard the footsteps going by, correct?
Yes, I had heard the footsteps go by in the second volley of shots.
So the call 911 came within seconds after the second volley of shots.
I believe it did.
Your Honor, fast. Mr. Hazelwood will take his seat.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hazelwood. Please return to your chair. So in your estimation, Mr. Hazelwood, the person who was saying call 911 was moving away from the other person. Does that sound about right based on what you said before?
I could not state that.
And the person who was saying call 911, they were saying that in a very clear, as you said, very clear, very concise voice, right?
Yes.
And you believe the person who was saying that was saying it in a voice that was very much under control.
Yes, it was surprising that when I heard call 911, it was spoken very clearly, not rushed, and not panicked. And I still found that surprising.
Not rushed and not panicked. That was
very much under control.
And Mr. Hazelwood, you had never seen either of these sources of these voices before, had you?
At the time of the incident, no, I had no idea who was speaking at that time.
And you had never heard either of those voices prior to that, had you?
No.
May we have a moment?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Day.
Mr. Hazelwood, these events took place, in your estimation, within the space of seconds, correct?
I don't know how long a matter of seconds would be. I also remember as the events occurred wanting to shut my eyes initially, force myself back to sleep, yet there's somebody hurt, get up. And how long did that take? I could not honestly say. I mean, I'm waking up into something here, a lot of confusion, and it was after hearing call 911 that I think I remember wanting to shut my eyes, say, I got to get sleep, but yet also, you got to get up. And was there a lag of seconds in there? I don't know. That part is, there was that, and then it was the full weight of sunk in that whatever length of time that was, of wanting to block it out and needing to know something happened. And that's when I got up and went to the door. Okay, do I hear something? And that was before I don't know why I didn't think about reaching for my phone immediately, but I didn't. I was drawn to the door. And then went back and knew that somebody had already called at that point.
And Mr. Hazel, you do remember from that night, the volley that woke you up, the sounds, the voices, the shot, the volley, the running, the second series of shots, and then the clear, concise, controlled voice saying, call 911. That happened in a sequence of time. That was there was no big gap there.
No. There was one shot, scuffling, the first series of shots, then the running down the hallway, and then the second series of shots, and then followed by call 911.
We have a moment. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Day. And Mr. Hazelwood, I apologize to you. It's a big room, so come in a little bit to the microphone, because when you're at a distance, it's a little bit harder to hear. Go ahead, Mr. Day.
Your Honor, thank you. Pass the witness.
Thank you. Mr. Prindle, do you have any redirect examination of Mr. Hazelwood?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Just briefly. Mr. Hazel, just a couple of follow-up questions. Coming along with this experience, what are many impacts that have on you? How did it make you feel that you?
Your Honor, sorry, irrelevant. We approach you.
Yes, go ahead. I don't want to sustain the objection. Go ahead and proceed with any additional questions that you have, Mr. President.
Mr. Hazelwood, the diagram that you've drawn on the easel here represents or indicates that you were in your room next to 7-Eleven, is that correct?
That is correct.
And at any point in time during what you heard an argument?
Yes.
It sounded like this might have been a verbal argument.
It sounded a verbal argument.
Could be verbal at that point in time?
Verbal, but very close together.
Okay. And you described it as being face-to-face, is that correct?
Yes, and as I've read testimony, not testimony, or interviews.
Listen to the question and answer only the question.
Okay, thank you.
Please restate the question, Mr. Riddle.
Mr. Hazel, you just described the argument you heard. I think you used the word nose-to-nose or face-to-face.
Yes, I used the term nose-to-nose in an interview prior, and that was how I described it. They sounded like they were. I know you can't describe.
They're not, the jury's not hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Come to the microphone and please keep your voice elevated.
Okay, I'm sorry. It sounded during the argument like they were inches apart. They were right in each other's face. I would have used a term I may have used sometime was nose to nose. They were very heated. It just, that's when I woke up, was that real sharp, loud argument.
And once again, you described the footsteps as being heavy.
Yes.
Your Honor, sorry, objection. These are all asked.
I'm going to sustain the objection, although the response has already been given, so I'm not going to have it stricken from the record, but still, let's not ask the same questions that were asked on the record.
That's it.
Yes, go ahead, Mr.
Hazel, at any point in time, there is, when you heard, were you frightened?
Objection, Your Honor. Let me approach.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Say no further questions.
All right, thank you. Is there any cross-examination of the witness?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Does the jury have any questions of Mr. Hazel? All right, go ahead, please. Can we have the attorney's approach, Mr. Day? Again, this doesn't apply to all of the questions. Just so the jury knows, you can't ask people to speculate. You can only ask them what they know, what they believe they understood, not for them to try to guess beyond what they have testified. So I'm going to ask the questions, but in a way that, again, Mr. Hazelwood, the jury has questions of you. Don't speculate. What you sensed that evening, what you understood that evening, is what your testimony should be.
Okay.
In spite of however I phrase the question. Was the voice, and again, you may have already testified, but these are questions from the jury, and they may need, in fact, they do need clarification on certain issues. But listen to the question and just state the question. Don't go beyond that, please. Was the voice you heard saying or calling out 911 similar to either of the voices that you heard related to the earlier argument that you described?
I cannot say that.
Again, the question is, when we visited there is a room that was adjacent to the room that you were in, 709. Could someone from a room across the hallway have said, call 911?
Yes. It was in the general direction of where I heard the last set of gunshots from, but it was a general direction. It was very clear and very concise.
All right, so maybe let's try to make it a little bit more precise if we're able to. You're in room 709, which is what I consider to be adjacent or right next to room 711. Even numbers on one side, odd numbers on the other. So it would be the room adjacent or next to room 711. Can you, with the laser pointer, or if you'll just go out to the diagram and point to where you believe the voice saying call 911 came from on the diagram?
Yes, sir.
So you believe it would have been something not in room 711, but outside or in front of room 711?
That is correct.
Thank you. Go ahead, return to your seat. We have some other questions. All right, and I know that you responded to questions from the attorneys related to this next question, but now that you've had a chance to respond to those questions, the argument that you heard and the scuffling, I believe you mentioned that word as well, after the first shot, is there any way to estimate the duration of those two events? The length of the argument, which is the way I'm interpreting this question, the length of the argument, the length of whatever you believe was the scuffling that you heard. Can you estimate the amount of time, or can you associate a period of time related to these two events?
The argument itself of the two voices, very loud, and what I have described before as face-to-face or nose-to-nose, was literally just a few words. I mean, just like what I woke up to was the very heat of the disagreement. And as soon and then immediately there was a change to the phrases of disbelief when, in my mind, there was a weapon or a gun present. Something scared one of the two people arguing.
Okay, again, all you're being asked in this question is, can you estimate the duration? And again, I want to make sure that we don't mislead the jury either. You're waking up to this noise that you're hearing. Is that right?
That's right. So it was a phrase or two after the real sharp argument of the disbelief, the first shot, then scuffling. Was the scuffling 2 or 3 seconds? That would be a guess on my part, but there was a definite scuffling and then a volley of shots.
You don't want the jury misled. You were asleep at the time that you woke up to what you were hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, I was asleep, and did I hear, how long the argument had been going before I woke? I have no idea. I just remember the very sharp piece of the argument, waking up to that, then the disbelief, and then the first shot.
All right. Thank you. Okay, this is a little bit different from one of the earlier questions that I posed to you. To be clear, so that the jury is clear, are you indicating through your testimony that you are confirming that the voice that called out 911 or 911 and the voice that was yelling out, or that you heard say, "I can't believe this is happening to me," your testimony is that you believe that those were 2 different voices.
Can I ask a clarification of you on that?
Yes, and again, staying consistent with what you testified earlier.
Okay. You're only asking, did I hear a difference between the voice of disbelief and the voice of 911, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I believe those were 2 different voices.
Thank you. Again, the question, perhaps it was covered in an earlier question, but you did hear, besides the argument of yelling initially as you woke, you did hear some degree of scuffling occurring, even though you're not exactly sure of the duration of time.
The scuffling, I believe I heard, was right after the first shot.
Okay, but nevertheless, you did hear, the question is, just to confirm to the jury that you did hear both what you took as a confrontation, and at some point you did hear what you believe was scuffling, as you described it.
After the first shot was before I could hear any foot. When I described scuffling, I mean movement of feet.
Right, okay. But you heard that in very close proximity to the yelling, the shot, the scuffling, is what you're saying?
Yes.
I believe that this question is related to the shots that you heard, or you testified that there was an individual shot, that there was a first, what you described as a volley, and then what you described as a second volley. And I believe that the jury is asking for confirmation that the second set, or the second volley that you heard, you believed it to be out in the hallway versus the room.
Yes.
jury have any additional questions of Mr. Hazelwood? May Mr. Hazelwood be excused?
But one follow-up.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, forgive me. If either attorney has a follow-up, Mr. Penderloh, the protocol is for you to ask any additional questions on this.
Mr. Hazel, did you know at that point in time, when you heard about this incident, whether or not there was anybody in the bus home?
I didn't know anyone who was in what room, as far as anybody across the hall, until the next morning, I believe, when either the detectives come out or came up to interview, or when I went to leave the room and I had to get one of the investigating officers to escort me down. And then I believe I saw somebody come out. They also opened their door. And that was directly across from my room.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Day, any additional questions of Mr. Hazelwood?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hazelwood, you believe the person that you heard calling out, call 911, you believe that person was trying to get someone's attention, was trying to get help?
Yes, it seemed as if it was spoken directly to someone else.
No more questions, Your Honor. Thank you. All right, thank you. May Mr. Hazelwood be excused?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Penderloh. Mr. Day. Mr. Hazelwood, thank you very much for your testimony. You have no further obligations to the trial. Thank you. All right, your next witness.
Your Honor, given the fact that it's 12:20, I'm happy to attempt to call a witness. I would prefer not to break up testimony. However, we will have to call a witness out of order if we can approach the penalty.
All right. So let me do this. Let me ask the jury to come back from its noon recess at 1:45 this afternoon. So please be back at that time. You're now excused for your new knowledge.
Congratulations, jury.
Take your seats, please. Let me see, Mr. Day, I don't believe that we assigned the defense exhibit number diagram. We don't have to admit it into evidence, but I prefer that it be marked. Because it would be used as an exhibit, even if it was demonstrative in nature. So, because there may be a renumbering, just at least mark it, and we will assign it a number associated with your restructured exhibit list.
Yes, sir.
So let's not forget to do it, but let's at least put a exhibit sticker, a defense exhibit sticker on it, and then we'll assign it a number once I have unless you want to assign it number 1 at this point, and then reorder. But if you've already prepared your list, then give me a number off that list, and if you've done neither, then let's just hold it in reserve.
Judge, it could be defense exhibit 5.
And I'll 5. Yeah. So I'll note for the record that the demonstrative display is defense exhibit number 5 in case it has to be referenced later during the course of the trial. Mr. Rook, you indicated that you had a matter.
I'm sorry.
Did you indicate that you have a matter that you wish to address?
Well, if I had to call a witness out of order,
Oh, I see. No.
I would have to address that we are going to have some witnesses who we flew in. We're going to have to fly out before the end of the day.
So just let me know who they are, even if it's out of order.
Yes, Your Honor.
Because previously, the next witness that we were supposed to go to was Mr. J. Miller.
Mr. Miller is local.
Okay. So Robert Oral says Socorro, but I'm assuming that you are discussing Marianne Hale from Woodland, California. You would want to go to her next?
Your Honor, I believe that would be appropriate, yes.
And then who else do you have to have today?
Lori-Ronaldo.
What number is she? Lori, oh, I'm sorry, dash. That's number 2. Who else?
I have just one moment.
Yes, go ahead.
Get all the list. I was sitting behind the
I'm looking for others that are out of state addresses.
Yes, Your Honor.
There's someone that you have down from Santa Rosa, but if you're looking for out of state, I do not.
Your Honor, number 10 is Brody Lane.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Okay, so that would be the third witness.
Mr. Ross. Your Honor, Erasmo Bravo, that's Mr. D'Antoni. It will be Mr. D'Antoni's witness. That is number 14.
The individual from Santa Rosa, New Mexico. Mr. Bravo, is that right?
He's from Santa Rosa. He needed to testify today.
Okay, so let's be here promptly, and again, I apologize, there is 1:15. I was hoping to take it actually a little bit later into the noon hour, but at this point, we've allowed the jury to leave, so we'll be back at 1:45 this afternoon to continue with the witnesses in the manner that you've suggested. Okay, thank you very much.